Welcome to the channel, dear listeners. Tonight, we bring you a mystery that you will never guess until the very end. A tale of shadows, secrets, and a library where history whispers, and one scream changes everything. If you're someone who loves to put on a story as you drift to sleep, this one's for you. So settle in. Dim the lights. Let the world outside fade away, and remember, in a good mystery, the clues are always there, hiding in plain sight. This is Murder in the Library. Chapter 1. The Invitation. There is a particular grey which belongs only to English afternoons, not the honest grey of rain, nor the cheerful grey of steam, but a polite and undecided colour which seems to apologize for existing at all. It was of this species that the sky over our street had made itself when the bell rang in that precise, well-bred manner which always suggests a servant who has been given instructions. Poirot, who was polishing a paper knife with the same care he might give a diplomatic dispatch, looked up with mild approval. "Educated knuckles, Hastings," he said. "Open and we will meet their schooling." On the step stood a young woman in a dark travelling cloak. She had the steadiness of the professional class, someone who fetches things and does not lose them. In her gloved hand lay a thick cream envelope, sealed with a deep red crest. "For Monsieur Hercule Poirot," she said. "From Lady Constance Harroway of Harroway Hall." Poirot broke the seal neatly. His eyebrows performed the very smallest of calisthenics. "Eh bien," he murmured. "A library, a manuscript, and a family that does not agree about money. The invitation, it writes itself." He handed me the letter. "Monsieur Poirot, permit a stranger the liberty of urgency. I am Lady Constance Harroway. This Friday I present to a small family gathering the Blackbourne manuscript, our title deed in all but name. Certain parties have expressed a desire to sell it, others to test its validity. There has been, I regret to say, disagreeable talk. The weather promises a storm. I should be grateful for your presence to discourage theatricals and ensure that what must be settled is settled in the light. If you will come, the driver will meet you at Little Bramble Station at 4. With thanks, Constance Harroway Theatricals," I said. "That doesn't sound promising." "Theatricals in a library," Poirot returned. "It is like brandy in tea, too stimulating for the place that contains it. We shall go," he glanced at the messenger. "You will tell Lady Constance we accept." The young woman inclined her head as if ticking a box that had long desired a tick, and departed. Poirot resumed his polishing of the paper knife, satisfied now that there was a purpose to it. "Harroway Hall," he said. "You know it?" "I've seen sketches in county histories," I said. "Oak panelling, long windows, a family fond of portraits." "Portraits," Poirot mused, "are the very best audience for a crime. They see everything and tell nothing." 2 afternoons later, the little station at Little Bramble produced us onto a platform that smelled agreeably of wet wood and coal. A motor car, the sort with a hood that looks permanently doubtful of the weather, stood waiting. The chauffeur was lean, grey about the temples, and had the particular courtesy of a man who has seen families survive their dramas by means of tea served at the right moment. "Mr. Keene, sir," he said. "Lady Constance's butler. Her ladyship asked that I fetch you personally." "You do her ladyship too much honour," said Poirot, relishing the protocol, and allowed himself to be handed in with the air of a conquering general who has decided to be modest about it. The lanes narrowed, hedges crowding close as if they wished to listen. Beyond them, a line of beeches turned the road into a tunnel of green that had held its breath since June. We came at length to iron gates in a stone wall, gates whose scrollwork had been fashioned by someone with a taste for thorns. Through them the drive ran straight, as if trained to it, toward a house that had been given its instructions early and had remembered them. Harroway Hall, long and low and sober, its central windows looking out with that calm which only very old houses manage without affectation. Mr. Keene guided us to the steps. In the hall the floors were black and white marble, and the clocks had all agreed upon 4:15. A portrait of a gentleman in sober black presided over the foyer with the benign disapproval of a dean. The air smelled faintly of beeswax, and older paper, the scent that libraries loan to the rest of a house when they are very sure of themselves. Lady Constance received us in a morning room that had refused to become fashionable. She was of that elegant, fragile sort which turns out on closer inspection to be as sturdy as oak. Mourning suited her, but not because it softened her, rather because it gave her already exact manner a reason for being exact. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, with none of the fuss that ladies sometimes make of detectives. "Thank you for coming." "Captain Hastings." "We are at your service, madam," said Poirot, bowing just enough. "You will wish to see the library," she said. "It is the stage, I suppose. Keene." Mr. Keene led us down a corridor, where the carpets had the subdued confidence of things that have lasted, and opened a pair of high doors upon a room that made me want, rather unexpectedly, to behave. The Harroway library was panelled in dark oak. The shelves carried their books like men carry good reputations, and the light fell from tall, mullioned windows in ordered squares. In the centre stood a long table, where some ancestor had once, I felt sure, signed either a treaty or a declaration to plant beans. And against the far wall a glass-fronted cabinet on a brass pedestal, locked, and clearly aware of its own importance. "The Blackbourne manuscript," said Lady Constance, as if acknowledging a guest who was expected to be difficult. 16th century. It concerns a grant of lands and rights to the Harroway family, renewed once during the reign of Charles III. The scholars disagree as scholars do, but it has stood our quarrels these past 200 years. "And now it must stand a few more," said Poirot. "Gently. You perceive quickly," she said. "My eldest Julian is impatient with history. He wishes to exchange our past for ready money. Lionel, the younger, wishes rather that the past would exchange him. Isabella, my adopted daughter, believes both are behaving badly and would like, if possible, to maintain civility while rejecting their premises." A corner of her mouth twitched. "As for me, I would prefer not to sell the house to buy back what selling would cost." "Formidable," Poirot murmured admiringly. "And, Mr. Keene, this cabinet, who holds the key?" "Her ladyship," said Keene, "and myself in duplicate kept in the house safe. For the showing tonight, Lady Constance will bring the manuscript to the table for 10 minutes only." "You expect disagreement to mark the hour?" asked Poirot. "I expect tempers," Lady Constance replied, "and a storm. The forecast is impertinent." She turned then toward the door as footsteps approached, firm, confident. Julian Harroway entered with the careless charm which always suggests an account that has not been paid. He was handsome in a way that made me distrust my own eyes, and greeted us with the kind of cordiality employed by men who want to persuade a waiter to overlook something on the bill. "Mother tires herself with precautions," he said, crossing to the cabinet with a glint that was not for books. "And we are very grand about paper here, Monsieur Poirot, but paper burns." "True," Poirot said pleasantly, "and so does a house if one is careless with matches." Julian's smile held. But it stopped moving. Another figure appeared in the doorway. Isabella Harroway, slight and composed, with the sort of intelligence that does not advertise itself, but arrives everywhere on time. "Mother," she said, "Dr. Blake telephoned. He is delayed on the lower road with a motor car that refuses to consider puddles ornamental. He will be here after dinner if the rain does not object." "And Lionel?" Lady Constance asked. Isabella's expression did not change. "In the stables, avoiding the library with the dedication of a man who intends to be honest about his cowardice." "Excellent," said Lady Constance. "It will do him good to confront both." She gathered herself then, as if remembering that a day must be lived by quarters of hours. "Mr. Keene will show you your rooms. Dinner at 7. We will receive the manuscript at 9 when the family and Mr. Pembroke, our solicitor, are present." "Madame," said Poirot, "one question only. You wrote that certain parties wished to test the validity of the manuscript. Who are these parties?" "Lawyers retained by my son," she said without ornament, "and a collector of unpleasant zeal who believes national treasures should be private collections if he is the nation." Julian laughed lightly. "He pays better than the nation." Lady Constance did not look at him. "We will not discuss commerce in front of the books," she said. "They have long memories." When we had been conducted to our rooms, the rain began in earnest, first as a nervous patter on the leaves, then as a drumming that made the house lean a little closer to itself. I unpacked and tried not to think too romantically of oak panelling. Poirot, who had been observing the corridor from our doorway with the absorption of a botanist considering a fern, came in at last with a nod that meant the pattern had pleased him. "Well?" I asked. He shrugged gently. "A house that loves order, a family that does not, a document which is both treasure and weapon. And this," he held up a small object I had not seen him take, a smear of linseed on the brass hinge of the library cabinet, fresh not from the carpenter of last year. "Linseed? It kisses wood," Poirot said. "But here it is on metal. One oils a hinge to make it quieter. Why would one wish quiet, Hastings? Unless one intends a thing to open without ears complaining. You think someone has been at the cabinet already?" "I think," he said, "that someone has rehearsed." He placed the paper knife carefully on the dressing table, aligning it with the edge in a way that would have drawn a reprimand from any less kindly providence, and smiled that small, anticipatory smile which means the curtain has not yet risen, but the audience has taken its seats. "Come," he added, "we will be on good terms with the weather and with Mr. Keene, and tonight at 9 we will see whether the books prefer tragedy or comedy." Outside, the storm muttered. Inside, the house adjusted a picture on its hook and pretended not to be listening. Chapter 2. Harroway Hall. The storm that had teased the edges of the countryside all afternoon made good on its promise by evening. The carriages and motor cars that brought the Harroway household together for dinner had arrived beneath a sheet of rain so thick that even the gravel drive lost its voice. Inside, the house accepted the weather like an old servant, patient, unimpressed, slightly inconvenienced. Poirot and I descended the broad staircase at 6:45, greeted not by footmen or butlers, but by the peculiar silence of houses preparing to host family quarrels in their best clothes. A grandfather clock in the hall announced the hour with a calm authority that felt entirely at odds with the atmosphere. In the drawing-room, the fire had been coaxed into life with the fervor of someone trying to prevent awkward conversation. It cast gold against the dark oak paneling, catching the faces of the assembled family like candlelight in a row of mirrors. One could have taken a photograph of the group and sold it as a study in quiet tension. Lady Constance sat near the fire, dressed in black silk, her spine a ruler no one had ever dared to bend. Her eldest son, Julian, stood with one elbow on the mantel, holding a glass of whiskey in a way that made it look like an argument. His younger brother, Lionel, leaned in a chair as if its structure offended him. Isabella, slight and thoughtful, stood at the window with her hands clasped behind her back. Mr. Pembroke, the family solicitor, a man whose spectacles carried the weary knowledge of other people's money, was pouring himself a modest sherry. And near the door Edith Quill, the archivist, observed the room like a librarian watching a shelf about to collapse. "Ah," Julian drawled as we entered, "the great detective. If anything happens to the manuscript tonight, Mother, I trust we're to be interrogated before the coffee?" Lady Constance's gaze cut through him without needing to sharpen. "Julian, be quiet." Poirot inclined his head, the smallest bow, like a man who had seen many families begin an opera without knowing they'd written a tragedy. "It is most kind to welcome me into your home," he said, "but already I sense, how shall we say, a certain electricity in the air." "It is not only the storm," Julian smirked. Lionel exhaled sharply. Isabella did not move at all. Mr. Pembroke cleared his throat with the delicate gravity of a man adjusting a will. "It has been a spirited few weeks, Monsieur Poirot. This manuscript business has set off more sparks than I'd expected. Because," Lionel cut in, "it isn't a manuscript. It's a set of shackles. Mother refuses to sell it. Julian wants to. Isabella pretends to be neutral, and the rest of us get to sit here like museum pieces while our lives are arranged on a table." "Lionel," Lady Constance said softly. The softness was far worse than shouting. "It's true," he muttered. "We're prisoners of a piece of parchment." Poirot turned toward Isabella. "And you, mademoiselle? Do you share this view?" Her eyes flicked to the window before meeting his. "I think some prisons are built from paper, but some inheritances are worth keeping, because if you give them away, you never get them back." "Spoken like a headline," Julian said. She gave him a look that said everything she did not need to say aloud. We moved into the dining room shortly after. The table, long and polished, reflected candlelight like a polished river. Courses appeared and vanished, clear soup, cold trout, roast lamb, but the talk that rose between the silver and the linen was as brittle as thin glass. Mr. Pembroke attempted to speak of the weather. Lionel ignored him. Julian discussed London with the boredom of someone trying to make it sound like Paris. Isabella said nothing. Lady Constance ate as if silence were a weapon she intended to use with precision. When the last dish had been cleared and the coffee served, Lady Constance rose. "At 9 o'clock," she said, "we shall convene in the library. The manuscript will be brought out from the cabinet for viewing. There will be no discussion of sale tonight. There will be no debate. If anything is to be said, it will be said tomorrow in the presence of counsel." Julian tilted his head. "And if the manuscript simply vanishes?" Constance looked at him steadily. "Then it will be found." Poirot's moustache twitched ever so slightly. He knew a challenge when he heard one. By the time we gathered again, the rain had deepened from polite annoyance to a siege. Thunder rolled somewhere over the moors, and the wind played against the tall windows like a thief testing locks. The Harroway Library was even more imposing by night. Candles burned in sconces along the walls. The tall bookcases loomed like silent jurors. At the far end of the room, the glass cabinet stood in a pool of golden light. Inside, upon its brass pedestal, lay the manuscript, a scroll bound in black ribbon, wrapped in its own legend. Lady Constance took the key from around her neck and, with the formality of a priest opening a reliquary, unlocked the cabinet. The small click echoed in the hush. She lifted the manuscript carefully and placed it on the table. "Blackbourne, 1573, Edith Quill said softly. "Ink, calfskin, wax seal intact. A history older than every one of us." "Or more valuable," Julian murmured. "Or both," Isabella added quietly. Poirot moved closer, studying the manuscript, but not touching it. His gaze, however, was not on the parchment. It was on the faces around it. Julian's greedy flicker. Lionel's resentful stillness. Isabella's composed distance. Edith's hunger that she tried to disguise as reverence. Even Lady Constance, whose hands trembled imperceptibly, not from age, but from the weight of something larger than her. Poirot inclined his head. "How very curious it is," he said softly. "That paper, so fragile, can weigh more than gold." A gust of wind shook the window panes. Lady Constance replaced the manuscript in the cabinet, turned the key and handed it to Mr. Keene, who locked it away in the house safe for the night. At that moment, the clock struck 9:30, and the house exhaled as though it had been holding its breath. Julian was the first to leave. Lionel followed, muttering under his breath. Isabella lingered by the door, listening to the storm. Edith's eyes followed the cabinet as though it might disappear if she blinked, and Poirot, he looked up at the ceiling, as if listening to the house itself. "The storm," he murmured, "does not worry me. It is the silence that comes after." Chapter 3. The manuscript. The night grew heavier as the hour turned late. Outside, the storm lashed the tall windows of Harroway Hall, as though intent on entering and finding its own seat at the table. The house, in reply, tightened its old timbers like a man setting his jaw. After dinner, the family dispersed in the way families do when none of them wished to be in the same room. Poirot and I remained in the corridor, lingering like polite shadows. "I do not trust this weather, Hastings," Poirot said softly, adjusting the lapels of his immaculate dinner jacket, "nor the faces at that table." At precisely 9 o'clock, the bell chimed, and the household was summoned once more to the Harroway Library. By now the lights were dimmed, the fire low but steady, and the tall cabinet at the far end gleamed faintly under its single brass lamp. The manuscript, still locked inside, looked almost alive in its pool of light, as though the centuries it carried were listening. Lady Constance stood beside the cabinet with her hands folded in front of her, the key hanging from a black silk ribbon around her neck. Julian arrived late, as expected, wearing his impatience like a well-tailored overcoat. Lionel slouched behind him, smelling faintly of whiskey. Isabella entered quietly, every movement measured. Edith Quill appeared last, clutching her leather notebook to her chest like a talisman. Only Mr. Pembroke was missing for a moment, but reappeared with a sigh and a handkerchief, having been delayed, he claimed, by the draught in the corridor. "We will keep this brief," Lady Constance said. Her voice carried not volume but weight. "The Blackbourne manuscript will be brought out for inspection and then returned to the safe for the night." She turned the key, opened the cabinet with a faint metallic whisper, and lifted the scroll out with care. Even Julian fell silent for a moment. The parchment was older than their quarrels, older than their name, perhaps. Its seal was still intact, its edges browned with time, but its ink was dark and steady. "Hundreds of years," Edith whispered, stepping closer. "And it still breathes," Julian's lip curled. "You talk as though it were a saint's finger." "In this house," Isabella murmured, "it might as well be." Poirot watched everything, not the manuscript, but the hands, the eyes, the way Lady Constance's grip tightened when Julian leaned too near. "Back away," she said coldly. He smiled, but he obeyed. When the inspection ended, Lady Constance returned the scroll to its velvet cradle inside the cabinet and relocked it with the click of something final. She removed the key and handed it to Mr. Keene, who disappeared down the hall toward the house safe. "And now," she said, "we sleep. Tomorrow we will speak of lawyers." The family filed out in tense silence, but Poirot did not follow. He remained by the cabinet, one hand resting on his cane, gaze wandering not over the glass but around the room. "Hastings," he murmured once the others had gone, "tell me, what do you see?" "Well," I said, "books, windows, a very smug cabinet, and a storm that won't let up." He smiled faintly. "And there on the floor near the ladder, do you see? A thin smear of wax, faint and glistening in the lamplight. Candle wax. Near it, on the carpet, the most delicate indentation of a heel." "Someone," Poirot said, "has been rehearsing." I blinked. "Rehearsing what?" "An entrance, a theft, perhaps even a murder. But let us not be hasty." By 11 the house had quieted. The corridors were pools of shadow, and the old grandfather clock ticked with the solemnity of a judge. Poirot, restless, paced our room with his hands behind his back. "This manuscript," he said, "is not only paper, it is a fuse that has been waiting for a match." From down the hallway came the muffled slam of a door, a faint murmur. Then silence. Poirot paused by the window, listening not to the storm but to what it hid. "Mark me, mon ami," he said quietly. "Before the sun rises, the Blackbourne manuscript will have changed hands, or its owner will, and somewhere in the bowels of the house the clock struck the half-hour. A candle guttered in the wind, and the library, full of centuries, held its breath. Chapter 4. The Murder. The night fell into that peculiar silence that only comes after hours of relentless rain, a silence that doesn't comfort but listens. Harroway Hall had settled into its long, heavy sleep. Candles had guttered out. Even the storm seemed to have decided that whatever was about to happen was best left undisturbed. Poirot and I had retired to our rooms shortly after the manuscript viewing. Or at least I had. Poirot never truly retired. He merely waited for the night to speak to him. I had just begun to drift into the half-sleep of bad inns and old houses when the sound came. A single sharp scream slicing through the walls like the tearing of silk. A moment later, a thud. Then silence again. I bolted upright. "Poirot!" "I heard it, Hastings," came his calm voice from the darkness. "That was no dream." We were down the corridor within moments, slippers scuffing against the carpet, candle in hand. The house seemed to pulse faintly as if holding its breath. At the far end of the hallway, the heavy oak doors of the library stood ajar, swaying slightly in the draught. Lady Constance was already there when we arrived, her nightrobe immaculate, as if even panic knew better than to disarrange her. Her face was pale but composed. Julian's room was just off the landing, and he had not appeared. But Lionel was there, eyes wide and unsteady. Isabella came running down the stairs barefoot, a shawl thrown over her shoulders. Edith Quill emerged last, clutching the rail as if she'd been waiting for the night to turn on her. Poirot raised a hand. "No one enters, s'il vous plaît." But the door was already moving on its hinges, as if the room itself were drawing us in. The library was cold colder than a room should be, even with the windows closed. But the window was not closed. It gaped a few inches, letting the rain's breath drift across the floor in a thin, misty ribbon, and there at the base of the long oak writing desk lay Julian Harroway. His dressing gown was thrown open. His head rested at an unnatural angle, a trickle of blood threading across the Persian rug beneath him. One of the ornate bronze bookends from the mantel, a snarling lion, lay beside his hand, stained dark at its base. Poirot knelt at once, fingers precise, never hurried. He placed 2 fingers lightly against Julian's neck, and then, without drama, straightened. "Il est mort," he said softly. Lady Constance exhaled once, sharp, contained. Lionel stumbled forward, but Poirot stopped him with the gentlest of gestures. "Step back, monsieur. If you loved him or hated him, do not disturb what he has left us." The cabinet stood intact at the far end of the room. The glass was unbroken, but the Blackbourne manuscript was gone. Only the empty velvet cradle remained. A single candle still burned on the table, its wax trailing onto the polished wood. Poirot's gaze swept the room like a brushstroke. The half-open window, the wax trail near the cabinet, a scuffed patch on the rug near the ladder, and on the edge of the writing desk, a folded scrap of parchment soaked in blood at one corner. He picked it up delicately between 2 fingers. "A torn page," he murmured. "But from where?" Edith Quill spoke first, her voice barely audible. "The manuscript." "Yes, mademoiselle," Poirot replied. "It has gone for a walk it was not invited to." Inspector Blake had not yet been summoned. The storm still made the telephone lines unreliable. The only authority in that room for the moment was Poirot. "Messieurs et mesdames," he said quietly, standing beside the desk, "we will remain calm. No one is to leave the house. Lady Constance, you will please have Mr. Keene guard the doors and the back entrance. Lionel, sit down before you fall down." Lionel obeyed numbly. Poirot crouched again, inspecting Julian's hand. One detail emerged that did not belong to the violence of the blow. A faint smear of oil on his fingertips. Poirot rubbed it between thumb and forefinger. "Linseed," he whispered. The hinge's whisper finds its echo. He stood, facing the family, the thunder murmuring low beyond the windows. "Julian Harroway is dead. The Blackbourne manuscript is missing. And the murderer," his gaze moved slowly across each face, "is inside this house. It is midnight. Before the sun rises, I will know who rehearsed their crime in silence." Chapter 5. Lockdown at Harroway Hall. The storm, as if ashamed of its complicity, began to draw back from the house in ragged breaths. The rain softened from a siege to a whisper. Inside, however, Harroway Hall grew tighter, smaller, every corridor a throat, every door a clenched tooth. Poirot stood in the doorway of the library and spoke without raising his voice. "Mr. Keene." The butler materialized, grave and colorless, like a page folded into a book and forgotten. "Bolt the front doors," Poirot said. "The terrace doors as well. Post Garth at the service entrance, and Hobson at the back passage by the scullery. No one goes out. No one comes in. Do you understand me?" "Yes, sir," Mr. Keene replied. "And the telephone?" "Dead," Lady Constance said. "The lines went out at 10. Then," Poirot murmured, "the house is a ship. We sail together until morning." He crossed to the window and shut it gently. On the sill, droplets clung like beads on a rosary. He studied the latch. It had not been forced. It had been invited. "Hastings," he said, "move your candle closer, if you please." In the strengthened light, the desk's leather top showed the dark star where Julian's head had fallen. The bronze bookend lay on its flank, its lion's grimace turned to the carpet. Poirot touched nothing. He only listened, to the room, to its tidy lies. "Lady Constance," he said at last, "we require a small inventory. The key to the library cabinet. Who holds it tonight?" "In the house safe," she answered. "Mr. Keene locked it there when the viewing ended." "The safe key?" "Also mine," she said. "On my chain." She held up the black ribbon. 2 small keys glinted like disciplined servants. "And a duplicate to the cabinet?" Poirot asked Mr. Keene. "1 copy, sir. In my custody." "Where is it now?" "In my pocket," he said simply and produced it flat on his palm like an admission. "Unused since this afternoon." Poirot inclined his head. "Barn, we will verify the safe presently. For the moment, positions. Where was each person between 11 and the quarter hour?" "They did it as families always do. Too quickly where truth is easy. Too slowly where it is not." Hastings wrote, his pencil making neat, relentless notes. Lady Constance, "In my room after the viewing." "I wrote 2 letters and rang for tea." It did not arrive. "I presumed the kitchen was short-handed." Isabella, "Reading in my sitting room. I heard the storm weaken and opened the window for a moment." Lionel, "In the stables. I came in at 11:15, roughly. I was walking it off." Edith Quill, "Cataloguing in the small study across from the blue parlour. I was restless. I took a candle and notes. My work keeps me steady." Mr. Pembroke arrived, tight-lipped, from the corridor where he had been telephoning the exchange to no effect. "In my room, reviewing a schedule for tomorrow's discussion. I stepped into the hall at 11:20 when I heard a door." Mr. Keene, "In the pantry, sir. I was checking the locks against the wind." "And Julian?" Poirot asked softly. Lionel's stare flicked away. "In his room, I suppose." "Until he wasn't." Poirot nodded, satisfied as far as one can be satisfied by a chorus with too many rests. Now 2 small inquiries. "Miss Quill, you took a candle from where?" "The sideboard near the blue parlour," Edith said. "The storm was fatiguing." "And Mr. Pembroke, the door you heard, where precisely?" He pinched the bridge of his nose. "Near the landing above the library. I cannot say if it opened or shut." "The wind?" "Of course," Poirot said, as if the wind had a vote. He sent Hastings with Mr. Keene to confirm bolts and posts, then knelt once more by the desk. Julian's right hand lay open, palm streaked faintly with the same oily sheen Poirot had found on the cabinet's hinge earlier. "Your linseed again?" Hastings murmured when he returned. Poirot said. "The hinge rehearses." The hand repeats. "It is a duet." He rose and walked to the glass-fronted cabinet. The lock plate bore no scratches. The keyhole no damage. Yet the right-hand door moved with suspicious grace when he tried it, locked but loose in its seat. He bent. In the fine seam where the brass met the oak, a hairline scuff shone. New, careful, heretical. "You see, Hastings?" Poirot murmured. "One may open a well-made case by treating it like a very bad one." A pin lifted, a hinge loosened. "Unlock or no unlock, the obedient door yields." "You think someone tampered with it earlier," Hastings said, "then returned tonight?" "Oui," Poirot said. "And they practiced with wax and heel. The smear we saw before, near the ladder." He looked across to the carpet where the faint, delicate crescent of a heel pressed the pile. "A small foot. A sure step." Lady Constance watched him with a queen's self-discipline. "Monsieur Poirot, I do not care for riddles." "My son is dead. Tell me if my house has harboured a thief as well as a murderer." "Madame," he said, unoffended, "your house has harboured a plan. The thief and the murderer may be one person, yes. Or the thief laid the table for a murderer to eat." He turned to Mr. Keene. "You will take me to the safe now." To the others, "No one will enter the library. No one will touch the cabinet. Captain Hastings, remain and watch, only watch." The butler led Poirot through a service corridor that smelled faintly of stone and starch. The safe sat in a small office behind the pantry, discreetly unimportant. Keene produced a key from his breast pocket. Lady Constance used the second from her chain. The door swung open on shelves lined with ledgers, a velvet tray and a metal box. "The cabinet key, sir," Keene said, taking the metal box and opening it with a separate key. Inside lay one old-fashioned key on a ribbon. Beside it a smear just visible in the lamplight of something honey-dull wax, Poirot said. "Not the beeswax of a polished rail. Candle wax as on the library carpet. Someone, earlier, has pressed a shape against this box. A mould attempted, perhaps, and abandoned." He smiled thinly. "An amateur rehearses making a key. A professional practices opening a door without one." He returned to the library with Keene, thoughtful, satisfied in the way of a man who has found the correct corner piece of a puzzle. "Inspector," said Mr. Pembroke in a small cough, remembering himself, "shouldn't we send someone to the village?" "For the police," "Mr. Keen's men will try the lower lane at dawn," Lady Constance said. "No one leaves before daylight." "Just so," Poirot said. "And now, if you please, the scene requires a little order. Mr. Keen, we will make the long gallery serve as a sitting room for the remainder of the night. Mrs. Quill, you will surrender your candle. Mademoiselle Isabella, return to your room and ask yourself this very honest question. If the manuscript never left the library, where would you hide it? Write your answer upon a card and bring it to me at 6. "Why me?" Isabella asked, startled. "Because you have the habit of thinking before you feel," Poirot said softly. "It is rare and useful at dawn." He gestured to Lionel. "You will remain where I can see you, monsieur. You are walking something off. I should like to know whether it is whiskey or shame. For the moment it matters not which." Lionel flinched, then looked relieved to have been told exactly what to do. "And Mr. Pembroke," Poirot added, "you will give Mr. Hastings the draft agenda for tomorrow's discussion. When men plan legal disputes, they reveal what matters to them by what they wish to schedule first." Pembroke blinked. "You think my program is a clue?" "I think," Poirot said, "that a mind leaves fingerprints on paper." He turned back to the desk. On the blotter lay a tiny curl of parchment, too small to be a page's torn corner, too neat to be accident. He lifted it with a penknife and held it up. Along its edge ran a darker strip, the faint sheen of sizing. "Ah," he breathed. Bound edges cut. Edith Quill, drawn despite herself to the sight, spoke with a kind of reluctant reverence. The blackboard was lined with a narrow binding strip to preserve it. "Anyone who handled it lately would have noticed." "Anyone," Poirot repeated. "Who handled it after the viewing, mademoiselle?" Her throat worked. "Not I." "Of course," he said gently, and let the curl fall back upon the blotter like a hair. Hastings cleared his throat. "Poirot, the torn scrap we found, soaked at one corner." "In my pocket," he said. "It will match the page left in the cabinet cradle, I think." The murderer needed a trophy or a threat or insurance. His eyes travelled, unhurried, across the shadowed shelves, up the ladder rails, along the crown mouldings over the mantel, down to the lion bookend's stained base. But above all, Hastings, it speaks of hurry. Nothing is sloppier than a thief who did not intend to become a killer. He addressed the room. "Hear me, s'il vous plaît." The window was open to feign departure. The wax was spilt to excuse a candle. The hinge was loosened because locks are proud and hinges are humble. A rehearsal was made. Then came a quarrel or a plea, and the lion came down upon a skull. A murder born of a theft or a theft born of a murder? That we will decide before breakfast. Lady Constance stood straighter. And the manuscript? Poirot's moustache lifted by a degree. "Madame, it is here, in this room." A rustle passed among them like wind through paper. "Here?" Isabella said softly. "Here," Poirot repeated. "Because the cleverest place to hide. A book is among books, and the most dangerous thing to carry into a corridor at midnight is a history that does not belong to you." He moved at last to the rolling library ladder and placed a hand upon its rail. "We will not search tonight. We will guard. In the morning, when the light is honest, I will invite the murderer to retrieve what they cannot bear to lose." He looked to Hastings. "You will sit here with me, mon ami. We will keep company with the lion and with the silence. And if the murderer comes," Lionel blurted. Poirot smiled, mild and devastating. "Then we shall offer him a chair. The guilty, Monsieur Lionel, always prefer to stand." The house settled again, this time with the uneasy respiration of a patient watched at bedside. In the long gallery, chairs were arranged, rugs fetched, shawls offered, and a butler's empire extended to the borders of the night. In the library 2 candles burned, one near the desk and one by the cabinet, their flames steady as metronomes. It was a long hour, and a longer half one. Somewhere a hinge complained and then thought better of it. The rain nursed its grievance and let it go. Hastings' pencil dozed and woke. Poirot, very still, listened not for footsteps, but for choice. The sound a desperate mind makes when it decides between waiting and acting. When at last the clock breathed 3, a floorboard whispered beyond the door. Poirot's eyes flicked to Hastings's. He did not move. The whisper stopped, rethought itself, withdrew. "Courage fails in threes," Poirot said softly. In fours it sometimes rallies, he settled back. As precise as ever. By dawn, he said, we will know which it is. Chapter 6. The Suspects. Speak, the morning light arrived reluctantly, as though uncertain it wanted anything to do with Harroway Hall. It fell through the tall library windows in narrow, grey stripes striking the empty manuscript cabinet like a jury's glare. Poirot, who had not slept a moment, remained perfectly composed, immaculate as ever, save for one rebellious hair of his moustache, which I strongly suspect was intentional. His patience during the long night had not been idleness. It had been the stillness of a hunter who already knows where the tracks will lead. Bon, he said at last, rising from his chair. The hour of the talking has come. Lady Constance had gathered the household in the library. No one spoke much. They entered as people do a courtroom, one where they are not quite sure whether they are the accused or the witnesses. Julian's absence, though physical, filled the room louder than any presence. Lady Constance. She sat straight-backed, the black ribbon around her neck stark against the morning grey. Her hands were still. Only her eyes betrayed the long night. Poirot began gently. Madame, after you retired, did anyone come to your door? No. Did you hear anything? Wind, rain, the occasional foolishness of old houses, but nothing human. And the safe? I checked it once before sleep. The keys were still on my chain. Poirot leaned forward. You did not remove them, not even for a moment. Not for a breath, Monsieur Poirot. Très bien, she was composed, but beneath it there was a tremor. Not guilt, something colder. Fear disguised as control. Aussi, Isabella Harroway. Isabella's shawl was still draped over her shoulders from the night before. She looked pale but alert. Her eyes followed Poirot carefully, like a student unwilling to be underestimated. Mademoiselle, Poirot began, you told us you were reading. Did you hear the scream? Yes, it was unmistakable. I came down at once. How long between the scream and your arrival here? Perhaps 2 minutes. And before the scream, what did you hear? She hesitated, then a faint noise. Not quite footsteps, like someone moving something heavy against the floor. A ladder, perhaps. She met his eyes. Yes, perhaps. Poirot nodded slowly. Your window was open, was it not? She blinked. How did you... The scent of damp night clung to your shawl, a detail most small. But you opened it to listen. Yes, she admitted. I couldn't sleep. And I thought I heard something outside. Perhaps it was only the storm. Poirot tilted his head. Or perhaps, mademoiselle, you heard the silence when someone stops moving. 3. Lionel Harroway. Lionel entered like a man dragging his guilt behind him on a chain. He hadn't changed his clothes. His hair was uncombed, his expression sullen. Monsieur Lionel, Poirot said evenly, last night you said you were walking it off. Yes. Walking off what? Whiskey, Lionel muttered, and a row with Julian. He wanted to sell the manuscript. I didn't. Poirot said softly. A difference of opinion about gold. One of the oldest motives known to man. Lionel's jaw clenched. I didn't kill him. No, Poirot agreed mildly. But one does not need to kill in order to quarrel. Tell me, the stables. Did you return through the front or the servant's door? Servant's door. Unlocked? So it was. Keene leaves it that way for the dogs. And did you pass the library on your way upstairs? Yes, but the lights were out. I swear it. Lights, Poirot murmured. Always lights. Edith Quilledith arrived clutching her notebook again, though it was clear she had not written a line. Her eyes darted between Poirot and the cabinet like a guilty librarian, watching a book she hasn't returned. Miss Quill, Poirot said gently, the manuscript, how well do you know it? I've catalogued it for 6 years. Every inch of it. Then you would know how to remove a page without breaking the seal, she stiffened. I'm an archivist, Monsieur Poirot, not a vandal, but also an expert. Her lips tightened. You told us you were working across from the blue parlour, Poirot continued. But the candle you took burned down to a stub. You worked a long time. What occupied you? Edith hesitated too long. Reading. What? The genealogical ledgers. Poirot lifted a brow. Very dull reading for a storm. She said nothing. Mr. Pembroke. The solicitor stood stiff, clutching his pocket watch like a moral compass. He was the least visibly shaken, which of course made Poirot suspicious. "Monsieur Pembroke, you heard a door?" "Yes, at around 11:20. "Could you tell from where?" "Somewhere above the library. Perhaps the east landing, or the study corridor." "And yet you did not investigate?" He flushed. "I'm not accustomed to wandering old houses at night." Poirot's voice softened. "But you are accustomed to handling fortunes. And you knew, did you not, that if Julian's wish to sell the manuscript succeeded, your firm would benefit handsomely from the arrangement?" He said nothing. "Lawyers," Poirot added delicately, "do not always profit from honesty." Mr. Keene, the butler, Keene, as always, was calm. But there is such a thing as a silence too polished. "You locked the safe," Poirot said. "Yes, sir." Yet the wax residue on the key box was already present. He did not flinch. "I noticed nothing unusual." Poirot studied him carefully. "No, but perhaps you were supposed not to." The silence, when the questioning ended, the room held its breath. Everyone had a piece of the night, but no one could yet be seen holding the dagger. Poirot folded his hands neatly behind his back and began to pace. "We have a quarrel about gold, a manuscript that weighs more than its parchment, and a house full of ears that did not listen quite carefully enough." His gaze drifted upward, to the ladder near the shelves. Someone was here before the scream. Someone rehearsed. Someone opened that cabinet without a key. Poirot stopped and turned sharply, his eyes landing on the cabinet. "And someone," he added, "is very sure they hid the manuscript well enough to outlast the dawn." His moustache twitched. "But, mes amis, dawn has arrived." Chapter 7. Threads of the Truth. By the time the last candle in the library had given up the fight, the morning light had fully taken its place. It wasn't a kind light. It crept through the windows like a question no one wanted to answer. Poirot stood alone in the room after the interrogations, hands folded neatly behind his back. He did not pace. He listened. He always listened. "Murder," he said softly, "is like embroidery. It leaves tiny stitches in places where no one expects them." I sat at the long table, my notes spread before me, each contradiction marked, every hesitation underlined. Poirot hadn't told me what he was thinking. That meant, of course, he was thinking everything. The wax and the ladder. He crossed to the base of the library ladder and crouched low, examining the faint wax droplet we had noticed the night before. It had hardened now, small and sharp, but unmistakable. "A ladder," Poirot murmured, "is a curious accomplice. It leaves no opinion, only height." He climbed 2 rungs. Halfway up, he ran a finger along the top shelf, then paused. I heard a soft metallic click, a panel shifting behind a row of old law books. Poirot stepped down lightly, as though he'd just asked the room a question and it had confessed. "Mon ami," he said, "this is where the rehearsal ended." The loosened brass hinge from the cabinet, the wax candle on the floor, the faint scuff of a heel, it all pointed upward. Someone had known how to reach this shelf in the dark, but more importantly, someone had hidden something there. Not the manuscript itself, not yet, but something smaller. Poirot withdrew a small brass key blank, roughly filed at the edges. "A copy that was never finished," Poirot said. "Our thief did not need it, after all. They found a simpler way." With the window that lied, he moved next to the half-open window where the storm had been invited in. It was dry now, too dry. Poirot bent and ran his finger along the sill. No rain pooled there, no mud from the garden. "The murderer wanted us to believe they escaped," he murmured. "But this window has not seen a shoe. It is a coward's alibi. The open window was not an exit. It was theatre." And Poirot was very, very good with audiences. The cabinet and the brass cabinet stood where it always had. Elegant, smug, innocent. Poirot bent low, pressing a fingertip against the bottom hinge. A faint oil trace still clung to it. "Linseed," he said. "Applied before the murder, not after. It was loosened, silenced, prepared." I flipped back through my notes. Lionel came through the servants' door. Edith was alone in the study. Pembroke heard a door. Isabella opened her window. Lady Constance checked the safe. Everyone has a story. And every story, Poirot said, has the thing it does not say. He turned the cabinet handle gently. The lock held firm. but the door itself moved with a whisper of betrayal. The paper speaks Poirot laid out the torn fragment of parchment we'd found beside Julian's body. The edges were clean, straight. But the stain of blood was not Julian's alone. He fetched his magnifier from his pocket, holding it to the light. The ink bled slightly at one end, but along the underside, faint but visible, was a thin streak of archivist's binding glue. "Edith," I whispered. He didn't answer. But his moustache twitched. "She knew exactly how to handle the manuscript," he said quietly. "She loved it. She guarded it. And perhaps she decided to save it from being sold." The silent conversation Poirot began to walk slowly through the library, as if the books themselves were speaking to him. Julian argued with Lionel about the manuscript, he said. Julian wanted to sell. Lionel was too proud to kill. Isabella heard a sound she could not explain. Edith Quill had the skill to remove the manuscript. Mr. Pembroke heard a door but saw nothing. Mr. Keene locked everything and noticed nothing, which, mes amis, is sometimes exactly what someone is supposed to do. He turned sharply to me. "Do you know what I love most about libraries, Hastings? They are temples of silence. When someone lies in a library, the silence itself remembers." 6. A name on the wind. Poirot paused at the center of the room, at the exact spot where Julian had fallen. He tapped the floor gently with his shoe. "Hollow. A loose board," I said. "A hiding place," Poirot corrected. He knelt, slid a thin blade between two boards, and lifted it with delicate precision. Beneath lay a narrow gap, a perfect fit for a rolled parchment, but it was empty. "They rehearsed here," Poirot murmured. "They hid it here, but not for long." He rose, brushing the dust from his hands. "Who," he said softly, "would hide something not to keep it, but to retrieve it later? A thief without an escape plan, a heart too tied to this house to flee." His gaze drifted toward the door. It was not cold now. It was certain. 7. Poirot's quiet declaration. The suspects remained in the breakfast room down the hall, under Mr. Keene's discreet watch. Poirot did not rush to confront them, not yet. He straightened his cuffs, smoothed his lapel, and looked at the lion book end one last time. "The murderer is here," he said softly. "And the manuscript, too. They are merely waiting to finish what they started." He turned to me with a calm that was almost cruel. "Tonight, mon ami, we will let them try." Chapter 8. The trapeze-sprung night returned to Harroway Hall with a silence that was not quite silence. It was the kind that crouches, waiting for footsteps. Poirot had spent the day saying almost nothing. He had neither accused nor cleared anyone. He had merely walked the library twice, measured a floorboard once, and requested, politely but firmly, that everyone retire early. The house obeyed, not because it trusted him, but because it feared him. As the final light bled from the moors, Poirot took his seat once more in the library. I joined him reluctantly. The place still carried the faint iron scent of Julian's blood, beneath the wax and polish. A candle burned low near the empty cabinet, another by the ladder's base. Every window was latched. Every door was bolted. The house was a stage, and Poirot had written the script. "You see, Hastings," he said softly, "murderers do not sleep well. They are always listening for the sound of their own crime." The waiting hours passed slowly. The grandfather clock counted them with merciless precision. At one point, Lionel's boots creaked on the landing. Poirot waited. Lionel muttered to himself, cursed softly, and retreated. Not him. Then Isabella's light flicked briefly beneath her door down the hall. Poirot smiled faintly. "Curiosity," he whispered, "not guilt." It was nearly 3 in the morning when the sound came, not a scream this time, not a thud. A whisper, a soft, deliberate footfall on the runner outside the library, followed by another. Poirot's hand lifted, one finger. Silence. The door handle turned slowly, like someone testing a sleeping animal. It opened no more than a hand's width. Through the crack, the dim orange of a single candle bled in. Poirot remained perfectly still. The retrieval, the figure entered without sound. A dark cloak wrapped tight around narrow shoulders. One hand held the candle, the other pressed something to the chest. Barely breathing, they moved directly to the ladder, unhesitating. This was not exploration. This was return. The candle was placed softly on the floor. The figure climbed the ladder halfway, reached behind the shelf and drew out a long rolled parchment, the manuscript. Poirot rose then. Quiet but unmistakable. "Mademoiselle Quill," he said gently. "When one steals from history, history eventually notices." She froze, not like a guilty woman caught, but like someone who has just remembered that dreams end. Edith Quill turned, pale as the manuscript she held. The candlelight painted her face in trembling gold. You were waiting?" "Of course," Poirot said. "You were always going to return. It is your temple, n'est-ce pas? Your beloved manuscript. You could not leave it hidden under a floorboard, alone in the dark." Her voice cracked. "He wanted to sell it to strangers. He called it worth more than the house. But this house is nothing without it. And so," Poirot said softly, "you rehearsed. You loosened the hinge. You watched. You waited for your moment. The confession begins." She descended the ladder slowly, still clutching the scroll. "I never meant to hurt him. I only wanted to scare him, to keep it safe." Poirot's gaze did not waver. "But he found you." Her fingers tightened around the parchment. "He followed me. He thought I was stealing it for myself. He grabbed it, shouted. I panicked. You reached for the nearest thing," Poirot finished. "The lion bookend." Her breath hitched. "He fell," Poirot continued. The parchment tore, blood on the page. "You opened the window to make it look like a thief. But the storm, it is honest. It told me no one left." Edith's eyes filled, not with terror but a furious sorrow. He was going to destroy everything. Poirot stepped closer, not threatening, but like a man closing a book. "And so you destroyed him." The manuscript Hastings stepped forward, but Poirot lifted a hand. "Mademoiselle," Poirot said gently, "you may put the manuscript down now. It belongs not to him nor to you, but to the truth." She knelt and laid it on the desk where Julian's blood had once pooled. The ancient seal caught the light like a single accusing eye. "You could have hidden forever in the quiet," Poirot said softly, "but you loved this object too much to let it stay hidden." Edith let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh. "I spent my life preserving it. It was the only thing in this house that didn't lie." Poirot nodded. "And yet it became the loudest liar of all." The arrival. Keene and Lionel appeared moments later, summoned by the sound of voices. Edith didn't resist. She simply stood hollow, the night around her shrinking like a curtain after the final act. "She will not run," Poirot told them. "This is not a crime born of greed. It is a crime born of devotion. A quieter kind, but no less fatal." Lionel stared at the manuscript as though it might still curse them all. Poirot's reflection. As dawn bled pale over the moors, Poirot watched the constables take Edith away in the back of the motor car. She did not look back at the house. She did not need to. Everything she loved was still inside. Lady Constance stood at the door, shawl wrapped tight around her. She loved it more than any of us. Poirot inclined his head. "And love, madame, is the most dangerous motive of them all. It asks nothing and takes everything." He glanced back at the library, at the ladder, the cabinet, the window. "Murder," he said softly, "rarely hides in shadows. It hides where the heart refuses to look." Chapter 9. The reveal the morning had fully broken over Harroway Hall by the time Poirot gathered everyone in the drawing room. The storm had gone, leaving behind that washed, cold quiet of English countryside mornings, the sort of stillness that makes secrets sound louder. Lady Constance sat in the high-backed chair near the hearth, rigid and pale. Lionel leaned against the mantel, his hands jammed in his pockets like a man trying to keep himself from shaking. Isabella, solemn, stood near the window, letting the light fall across her face. Mr. Pembroke adjusted his tie in nervous increments. And Mr. Keene, ever the butler, stood discreetly by the door. They were all waiting, not for the truth, but for the form in which it would arrive. Poirot stood at the centre of the room, a small, immaculately dressed figure in a house much larger than him, but it was he who commanded every inch of it. "Mes amis," he began softly, "you have all spent the night in a house that holds two stories, the one you believe, and the one that happened. The lie of the window," he lifted a finger toward the east-facing library windows. Let us begin with the simplest lie. The open window. A clever piece of theatre. Rain, a gust of wind, the suggestion of a burglar fleeing into the night. But, he raised his brows, there were no muddy footprints, no marks on the sill, no water inside. The window was opened after Julian was struck down. Lionel shifted uneasily. Whoever killed him wanted to make you believe that the manuscript had been stolen by someone from outside. But no one came in. No one left. The thief and the murderer was already inside the house. The cabinet that whispered Poirot gestured next to the ornate manuscript cabinet. The lock, she is innocent. But the hinge? The hinge tells a different tale. A little linseed oil to silence it, a soft heel near the ladder, a wax drip on the floor. Someone practiced opening it quietly, days before the murder. His eyes moved deliberately from face to face. No one spoke. They did not need a key. They only needed the hinge to betray its loyalty. The floorboard Poirot walked slowly to the center of the room. He tapped the toe of his shoe against the wooden floor with a neat, deliberate toque, and here, beneath the boards, they hid the manuscript. Not to sell it. Not to flee with it. No thief would choose to stay in the house with their prize. No, mes amis, this was someone who could not bear to part with it at all. He glanced briefly toward Edith's now empty chair. She was already in custody, but her presence lingered like ink that hadn't quite dried. The false alibi Poirot turned toward the family and their carefully constructed timelines. Monsieur Lionel, you were at the stables. But you passed the library on your way upstairs. You saw the dark, yes? Heard nothing, perhaps. But it does not absolve you. Mademoiselle Isabella heard the sound of the ladder being moved. She did not imagine it. Mr. Pembroke heard a door but feared to look, because what is more inconvenient to a lawyer than seeing a crime before it is legally convenient? Lady Constance held her keys and Mr. Keene held his silence, as butlers often do. But none opened that cabinet, he paused. Only one person could open it. Someone who knew its workings better than any of you. Someone who had catalogued every inch of it for years. Fifey, the archivist Poirot's voice softened, not with pity but with understanding. Edith Quill, archivist, guardian of your family's history. It was she who loosened the hinge. She who practiced in the night with a single candle. She who hid the manuscript beneath the floorboards after taking it, planning perhaps to confront Julian in the morning. But Julian, he was impatient. He followed her into the library. He lifted the lion bookend from the desk with gloved hands. Its heavy bronze glinted cruelly in the morning light. He grabbed her. She panicked. She struck. And Julian Harroway fell, dead before the candle reached its final drip. A murmur rippled through the room. She opened the window, tore a piece of the parchment, left it near the body. A story written in haste, hoping you would all read the wrong chapter. From the heart of the crime, Poirot placed the bookend down gently. This was not murder for gold, nor for escape. It was murder born of devotion. He looked at Lady Constance. Edith Quill believed the manuscript was the soul of Harroway Hall. She could not let Julian sell it. She loved the object more fiercely than any of you loved each other. Lady Constance closed her eyes. It wasn't shock. It was recognition. Poirot's final words. Poirot folded his hands neatly behind his back. Every library remembers. This one remembered wax, hinges, floorboards, and lies. It remembered Edith's footsteps when none of you were listening. And this morning it spoke. He took a step back. The silence was absolute. Julian Harroway's death is not a mystery of who could. It is a tragedy of who would not let go. Aftermath Isabella broke the silence first. She loved this house more than we did. No, Poirot said gently. She loved what it represented. Hand love, mademoiselle, can be the sharpest knife of all. Lionel turned away from the room, hands trembling. Mr. Pembroke stared at the manuscript, as if the ink itself might accuse him next. Mr. Keene stood still, the perfect butler, but the lines around his eyes had deepened. Lady Constance rose slowly, straightening her shawl. Harroway Hall will keep its manuscript, she said quietly, but at a cost far greater than its worth. Poirot inclined his head. History, he said softly, always collects its debts. Chapter 10. Justice at dawn came to Harroway Hall like a pale apology. The storm had spent itself. The lawns lay rinsed and still, and the gravel drive wore a long damp gleam toward the gates. The house, which had clenched its teeth through the night, let its jaw slacken at last. Inspector Blake arrived just after 7 in a motor car that announced itself long before it appeared. He had the good sense to speak little and listen much. Poirot showed him the loosened hinge, the faint wax, the mark on the floor where the board lifted true. He handed over the unfinished key blank and the torn scrap with its thread of binding glue. The inspector made competent notes, nodded at the places where any man would have nodded, and importantly did not try to improve upon the truth he had been given. Edith Quill had not attempted to flee. She sat in the small morning room, with her hands folded around nothing at all, as though she were holding the edge of a page she had finally decided not to turn. When the constable entered, she rose without being asked. "Miss Quill," Inspector Blake said with quiet courtesy, "I must ask you to come with us." She nodded once. "The manuscript," she said, and looked not at the inspector nor at Poirot, but toward the library doors. "See that it is kept properly." "It will be kept," Lady Constance answered from the threshold. Her voice had the steadiness of a path chosen by those who loved it before it began to require blood. Edith inclined her head as if the exchange were a contract. She was led away between the constables. No struggle, no spectacle. Only that small private wince a person makes when the future closes a door. The household attempted breakfast. Cups moved to lips and away again. Toast became a pretext for hands to hold something that was not guilt. Mr. Pembroke cleared his throat twice and succeeded in saying nothing. Lionel stared at the tablecloth as if it might confide in him. Isabella buttered a slice of bread very evenly and then forgot to eat it. Poirot took only tea. He sipped it as a man measures a line with a ruler, precisely, repeatedly, as if accuracy could redeem appetite. At length Lady Constance set her cup down with a soft, final click. "I have considered what must be done," she said. "Mr. Pembroke, drop the papers today. The Blackbourne manuscript is to be placed in trust, not for private sale nor for leverage, nor as a bargaining chip in any negotiation. It will belong to the house, and when necessary to the nation. No Harroway, present or future, may dispose of it." Pembroke found his voice. "My lady, such a trust will be executed," she said. "If the law prefers another word for kept safe, it may use it." Isabella's shoulders loosened by a fraction. Lionel said nothing, but the colour returned to his face in a reluctant tide. Poirot nodded, satisfied. "History," he murmured, "will be relieved to discover it is not expected to pay rent." Lady Constance's gaze softened. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, "how does one forgive a death that was not intended but was committed all the same?" Poirot's hands met with their habitual precision. "With time," he said, "and with order. One cannot command the heart, madame. But one may give it good company. Truth, for example, and the knowledge that nothing further will be lost because of what has already been taken." She looked down at her palms. "Order," she repeated, as if tasting the word. "Very well." We walked the grounds once the inspector's car had gone. The air had the damp metallic scent that follows storms in hospitals. Beyond the cedars, the river moved as if it had never heard of manuscripts at all. Hastings, who is sometimes myself, was tempted to draw conclusions too tidily. "So it was love," I said. "Not greed. An archivist's love, perhaps the fiercest kind." Poirot smiled at me sidelong. "There are greeds that call themselves love, mon ami, and loves that behave like greed." Mademoiselle Quill wished to keep the past intact. Such wishes are very noble at dinner and very dangerous at midnight. "Do you think," I ventured, "that she will say more to the police?" "She has already said the most important thing," Poirot replied. "She came back for the manuscript. The thief who returns to the scene is not always foolish. Sometimes she is faithful. The court will consider that in its arithmetic." We paused where the gravel met the wider drive. A small object glinted near the verge, one of the library ladder's brass screws muddied at the threads. Poirot stooped and recovered it with a handkerchief. "Even ladders leave memories," he said, amused without indulgence. "See, Hastings? The house sheds the night like a snake its skin. The pieces glitter and the sun pretends not to see." He folded the handkerchief and put it away like a bookmark. By 11, Arrangements had been made. Mr. Keene, who possessed the gift of making mourning appear to be a perfectly normal household task, set the library to rights. The cabinet was cleaned and left empty, its lock repaired. The ladder stood aligned, its rails polished without apology. On the table, the green blotter had been replaced. The old one, with its patient stain, lay folded in a drawer that did not expect to be opened soon. Lady Constance asked that the manuscript be brought to the drawing-room for one final inspection, by her and by no one else. Poirot, with a bow, declined to attend. "It belongs to your memory now," he said. "Mine is too nosy." He and I walked instead to the little station at the edge of the village. The road steamed softly in the new sun. Here and there leaves held a last bright drop like a thought they were not ready to let go. "Will the family heal?" I asked. "They will behave," Poirot said. "It is not the same thing, but sometimes it is enough. Lady Constance will create a trust. Mr. Pembroke will admire it. Monsieur Lionel will be grateful to be told what to do. Mademoiselle Isabella will see that duty is not always the enemy of freedom. And Harroway Hall will continue to be itself, which is the greatest forgiveness houses offer the people who injure them." "And Julian?" I asked quietly. "Julian," he said, "will be a cautionary tale told in rooms with books. That is perhaps the correct afterlife for such a man." We reached the station, as the noon train breathed in with a sigh that sounded very much like relief. The porter touched his cap and offered a newspaper, whose headlines pretended to know all manner of things. They did not. Poirot declined the paper and instead refolded the letter of invitation from 2 days prior. Smoothing it as one might a linen napkin that had survived an unfortunate dinner, he placed it back in his pocket with care. "You keep it?" I asked. "I keep the beginning," he said. "It helps me to forgive the end." We took our seats. The carriage smelled of coal and upholstery, and a faint memory of soap. Through the open window, the countryside displayed its clean face as if to say that nothing important had happened. A lark risked a few hopeful notes. The train shuddered, decided, and moved. Harroway Hall dwindled behind us, shrinking from manner to silhouette to the merest suggestion of a grey shoulder against the line of trees. Poirot watched it go without regret. "You know," I said, "our listeners will have set this on as they went to bed. Some will have fallen asleep long before Edith returned to the library." "Très bien," Poirot said. "They will wake to find the pattern complete. It is a kind thing, to let the mind close its eyes before the danger is named, and open them upon the order restored." He settled the rug across his knees and closed his own eyes, not to sleep but to rest the cells that had done their night's work. "Tell them, Hastings," he added almost idly, "that when the world grows loud, a library is a good place to listen. But one must never forget, silence remembers." The train took the curve with a patient grace. The fields unrolled. The past, for once, consented to remain behind us. And in the space between stations, where even the telegraph poles grew thoughtful, the little man with the impeccable moustache permitted himself the smallest of smiles. Order had been restored. It is never triumph, it is only mercy. But for those who sleep to mysteries, it is enough.